I'm gonna bring up our next speaker. Where are you at, Matt? There he is. Oh boy. How you doing, dude?
Good, good. Life is good.
So I gotta just introduce you real fast because for those that do not know, Matt literally wrote the book on. Did you call it? You ended up calling it LLM Ops or LLMs in production? I can't remember.
LLMs in production. Yeah.
All right. I remember there was some contemplation around the name, and so you
Yes.
called it LLMs in production. I'm gonna drop a link to the book in the chat in case anyone wants to have a look-see while you're talking. But you got 10 minutes, man. I'll throw it on the clock here and we can get rocking and rolling.
All right. Let me share my screen.
This is the fun part.
Is it working?
It is. Oh, I love it. And because after you talk about evaluation, I'm going to talk about evaluation. And maybe I'll just have you hang out with me if you have an extra 5 minutes and we can talk about the survey that we did. Which, by the way, folks, if you have not done the survey yet, this is a perfect opportunity. Hopefully, Matt will inspire you. Go scan that QR code real fast and take our evaluation survey because we're going to be writing all kinds of reports on it. All right, Matt, I'll get out of the way. I'll let you cook, my man. Here we
All right.
go.
Yeah. So this has kind of been the theme a lot, evaluating language models. Kind of already introduced myself, but I'm Matt Sharp. I'm an mlops engineer. I've been doing it for quite a long time. Been in the data space 10 years. I currently work at a startup called LTK, and I'm an author of LLMs in production. So why did I want to talk about this? If you've been paying attention at all, there's benchmarks and they're just everywhere. There's so many benchmarks out there. It feels like every single time someone trains a new LLM, they go out and they run it against benchmarks and they run it against all of them until they find one that it's like the number one in. And then they say, hey, my LLMs is the best at this benchmark. And it's like, cool, okay. What does that mean? A lot of people haven't really dug into the benchmarks. And so that's kind of what I wanted to do a little bit here. So benchmarks are waypoints. I'm a big Zelda fan. If you've played Zelda, you might understand this, but like you see something off in the distance and you say, hey, I want to go over there. And so you kind of set a waypoint there and you kind of follow your map to get there. And there's lots of different interesting spaces in natural language and the language space. And so and we have set waypoints, which is our benchmarks, and the industry tends and community tends to over engineer and kind of move towards these benchmarks to make our models better to beat the benchmarks. And so it's really important that we set them correctly. So what makes a benchmark? It's essentially two things. We have a metric and a data set. However, a good metric is really difficult when it comes to language models, because how do you compare text? Here I asked two different models, who's Steamboat Willie, and they gave different answers. Both of them are pretty good. They kind of focus on different kind of facts, but how do you really compare? Which one is better than the other? And so that's kind of where metrics come in. So the very classic blue versus rouge, or if you're French, just red versus blue. These have been around for 20 years. Very classic. Unfortunately, they kind of have this understanding of not being very good. But to be fair, these are actually still some of the best metrics we have, and I think we're not using them enough. Blue, it's a precision metric, like how many words in the generated text appear in the ground truth. Rouge is the opposite. It's a recall. How many of the human words appear in the generated text? I'm not going to go too much more because I don't have a lot of time, but there are some issues with that. Mainly, we have to come up with, human ground truth and other things. And so we've kind of moved on to regression metrics. So like toxicity in particular, it's used a lot. It's just a regression model. We had data saying, hey, this is toxic. We had data saying this isn't toxic. And then we train the model. And then we say, hey, this new generated text, is it toxic or not? And it gives it a score, and that happened a lot in the video game industry. It's happened a lot in like forums like Reddit and things, because they care about that a lot, where there's human to human interaction. But then we have like sentiment, which happens at like Amazon. Hey, is this product good or bad? The reviews, are they good or bad? And then there's other ones, hurtfulness, reading level, complexity. There's actually a whole bunch of these different regression metrics. However, you got to be careful, because toxicity in the video game industry is going to look very different from like a business use case. In an email when it says per my last email or other things like that, that can be very toxic. But like it's business language, and so it's not going to pick up the same things. And so we do have other metrics as well. These are actually really solid metrics, because they just kind of really get down to what is the text, like word count, word length. However, they often don't tell us a lot. However, despite all of these metrics, we've come up with so many good ones. What do you think the one we use when it comes to benchmarks? Well, we don't use any of these. In fact, what we do is we just do multiple choice. Essentially, we're giving, in these benchmarks, we give them a question. We say, hey, is it A, B, C, or D? And then we say, hey, which one is it? And for me, as an mlops person, like this is a big problem, mainly, and you can come up with lots of different reasons for it, but the biggest one, in my opinion, is the fact that like it doesn't model what's actually happening in production. When I go on and I talk to ChatGPT, I never once have asked it a multiple choice question. And so these are actually, in my opinion, just very poor benchmarks. And just to kind of prove it, so open LLM, if you go to Hugging Face, and this is their main leaderboard, these are the main metrics it's going: ARC, multiple choice; HelloSwag, multiple choice; MMLU, multiple choice, all the way to grade school math, which is actually an exact match, because it's like 2 + 2 = 4. Does it come up with 4? So none of these are very good, but we tend to like them because they give us that almighty accuracy score versus like red and blue, rouge and blue, right? Like, and so unfortunately, this is kind of where we are. Next part is the data sets. And as you can imagine, overwhelming majority of our benchmarks are just standardized tests. This didn't always used to be the case. We used to have some amazing data sets that just don't matter anymore, because LLMs beat them all very quickly. But like we created tests to evaluate where language models were bad at. But because the industry has been moving so quickly, people are just like, oh, let's throw the SAT at it, or the ACT test, or, let's see if it can become a lawyer or a doctor, go through all those different tests out there. And ultimately, like, this is actually really lazy. Like, we're not taking the time to really evaluate where the models are good or bad. And this is one of the big cases, is that we don't have a lot of benchmarks around responsible AI. And so and we actually know how to do this pretty well. There's some good data sets on this. And so essentially what we do is we give it, if we want to compare gender to make sure our models are responsible in that space, we'd say, hey, complete the sentence with a profession. The woman is the man is and if it says nurse versus doctor, like there's some feelings there about what it is. And then generally, we would go and we would use those regression metrics, maybe toxicity, to kind of compare. How do you compare whether or not these results, though, are toxic? It's pretty difficult. And so we kind of still need some better metrics when we look at this. For responsible AI, there are some great data sets. Like there's the Wino bias, there's Calm, there's BBQ. But honestly, there's not a lot. I've read lots of different white papers where people have really gone into, hey, let's look at this on politics. Let's look at this on religions. They use that kind of the same things, Muslim man is or a Catholic man is and that's a great way to kind of see, hey, are these models biased towards certain religious groups or occupations or stereotypes? Unfortunately, a lot of these white papers aren't releasing their data sets. And so the open source community is really struggling, and we don't have very good benchmarks around this stuff. Which ultimately comes down, so monitoring in production. So natural language is constantly changing. And so one of the most common ways to monitor your model in production is say, hey, we'll just run the benchmark, every week and see if it's moving and changing. And it is going to be changing. We introduce new slang, new technology, cultural assimilation. But the big problem with this is data leakage. Overwhelmingly, our benchmarks are getting worse. This is getting back is because we're overfitting towards the benchmarks. Like we keep on saying, hey, like the model is doing bad in this spot where the benchmark found it. And so we're going to go and retrain and fine tune our models and beat the benchmarks. But and so like this is a constant battle. This isn't, you probably face this in a lot of other AI models, but this is kind of where we are. So where does the state of our affairs? Our metrics, they're essentially being ignored. We have so many of them, but we're just doing multiple choice questions. Our data sets, they're pretty much thrown together last minute. Researchers don't take the time to really create great data sets, so they go and find some standardized tests to run against the model. Our benchmarks, ultimately, because of the other two, they're just very unimpressive, and we're not really getting good benchmarks in areas that people tend to care about, like responsible AI. And to compound all this, we're optimizing to beat these terrible benchmarks, and so that brings up the question, is this the flag post that we really want? Or should we set new waypoints? And so just want to call out, like, this is a problem. We need everyone in it. We need everyone to really start thinking about how to make better metrics, how to make better data sets, how to make better benchmarks. And so thank you. If you scan this QR, you can find my book. For all those that have come to Manning has given me this discount code where you can get 45% off my book for everyone here. And I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
All right. Don't think like you're going anywhere anytime soon, man. This is so good, and it leads perfectly into what I'm about to talk about, because basically I wanted to go over the evaluation survey that we did a few months ago. And I know you were kind enough to help me with the new questions on the new evaluation survey that we've got out. So while everybody's got their QR code scanning apparatus out, I would recommend that you take a second and also scan that QR code. But the interesting piece here, man, you talked about a few things that are so top of mind for me. First of all, the metrics, and like, can you go back to that last slide before the Anchorman one, which props on the Anchorman one. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
This breaks it down so well. It's like, it just shows everything that is messed up with how we're trying to do evaluations in one very clean slide. It's like metrics, meh. Data sets, meh. Benchmarks, huh, could be better. And models, well, nah. So I'm gonna share my screen real fast, and we can go over this evaluation survey that we did so that you can see like what's going on there. I think it's probably, hold on a sec. Let me share this, and you should be seeing a Google Sheet right now. Yeah, I'll make it bigger so that everybody can see it nice and big. Here's how we got here. Here's all the raw data. Anyone can see this raw data and play around with it, see what people are saying. I mean, you'll come to the conclusion that Matt shared on that slide. And what we have here is, here's the answers, or it's basically like going through and showing what the questions were. And so this was version 1. If you want version 2, we've got the evaluation survey that we're doing here, and you can scan that and do it. But version 1, we were just asking some basic stuff like how big's your organization, what industry, all that fun stuff. And then, so here's version 2, boom. What I came across, I tried to put together my insights from this. And after talking or digging through the data, what I found was, when it comes to LLMs and just AI, there's a lot of budget being allocated to things. So of course that like follows the hype, right? We've seen that. Then we've got budget is coming from existing ML budget, or is it a whole new budget? The wild part was that there was 45% of respondents that said they were using existing budget, and then the remaining, whatever, 40%, 41, I can't do my math. I don't do public math, but that was saying that it's a whole new budget. So that is cool. That is really cool to see, and that makes sense. There's a lot of VC money pouring into this, thinking that there's a whole gold rush happening. The model size was super interesting too, because when it comes to what people were using, which I think plays a huge factor in how we're evaluating things, because if you're evaluating GPT-4, that's different than if you're evaluating something that you have a bit more control over, like a fine-tuned Mistral or Mixtral or whatever, right? And so people basically were saying they're using OpenAI, or they're using like some kind of a fine-tuned like open source model. And we saw a lot less of we're using Cohere or we're using Anthropic, which I thought was pretty fascinating there. It seems like +1 for the open source team. That's
That's
cool. But
fascinating. Love that.
yeah, it is nice to see. And finally, it feels like there's some actual quality open source models out there. And what you see, though, is that you have this trade off when it comes to, especially if you're dealing with the 7B models, you've got a trade off that people talked about how you can't really have it all. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too. You've got either like I can have it fast, a fast model, a cheap model, or an accurate model. Like it can't really be fast, cheap, and accurate, or at least not at this time. You can only have like 2 out of the 3. So if you're using OpenAI, maybe you're not going to get that fast part of it because the model's so big, unless you're doing the GPT 3.5 Turbo, right? And then here was that I think is super important to touch on when it comes to what performance, like what are people evaluating when they're looking at evaluation? It's all about accuracy. And then if you look at it, hallucinations and truthfulness, like and factual, those are the other like ones, hallucinations and truthfulness. So if you put accuracy, hallucinations, and truthfulness all together, that is top of the top, right? That is what is super important for everyone as they're looking at it. And when I thought about something that you were talking about, uh, when you were saying, yeah, it feels like the metrics and the data sets are a little bit off because you can ask 2 different models the same question, like you asked it about the Mickey Mouse. What was your question?
Steamboat Willie. Yeah, who is Steamboat Willie?
That's it. Steamboat Willie, and both seemed all right, but how do you decide which one's better and how do you decide if it actually is good? That's where things start to really go haywire, right? And you start to see like, oh, this is this good or is it not? And then when there is toxicity involved, you were talking about how at work you can have a whole different type of toxicity and it probably won't pass as toxic to a model at all. And so there's no data sets or metrics around toxicity, like work toxicity data set. I would love to see that if somebody wants to come up with that shit.
Yeah, me
But
too. I would love it.
there's there's no like, hey, we need this by Monday. Oh, that's toxic. That kind of thing. Or where's your TPS reports?
Yeah,
So
I was gonna make the joke that, like if you follow Britney Spears, apparently like toxic is a good thing, right? So like, in different spaces, like being toxic is, it's different, right? Like the words you
exactly.
choose, how you act, like it's gonna be different.
All of that. Yeah. So for anybody that just wants to like read this blog post that I wrote, here is the link. I just dropped it in the chat. And then you've got the metrics, you've got the data, and these 2 things, I think one thing that's fascinating when it comes to the metrics that you were talking about, different metrics feel like they are more useful depending on your use case. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, the ones that people were saying they were using, like one thing that was pretty wild was I think one or two people said that they were using HelloSwag. So you can go on here and like really dig through all of these questions and go through it. But yeah, I think there was very, very few people that said that they were using HelloSwag. Let's see. Let's actually go into it. So it's like what types of LMs, boom, 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 boom. What types of here. Where is it? Can you see that all right, or is it super small? I'll make it a little bigger for you. Here we go. One person said hella swag. So, yeah, pretty wild. You can see that like classification, basically like accuracy, precision, recall, F1, which, I mean, yeah, if you're doing if you have certain use cases, that's great. But like for a lot of other use cases, that's kind of worthless, right?
Yeah. And even like one of the big problems, I kind of get into it in my 10-minute talk, but like the difference why people say rouge and blue are difficult is because you kind of have to fine tune them, right? Like you have to decide what is the word connection. Usually it's some sort of n-gram, and like there's different versions of rouge and blue. And so it takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of knowing your data, knowing your use case. And a lot of people are not taking that time to, they just run it through a benchmark, whatever is out there publicly. But we need better benchmarks. Yeah.
100%. 100%. And yeah. So this is the evaluation survey that we did. All of this stuff is here. I'm going to share it in the chat so you can dig into the data if you want, and you can check it out yourself. So I'm still here, lucky me, and I would encourage you to check out the evaluation survey that we're doing. Fill it out. It would be super useful because all of this information, we're like not trying to gatekeep it at all. We're really trying to make sure that it's some for the community and anyone can use it however they want. All right, man. I always love talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on here and explaining why evaluation is pretty much a little bit meh right now. And I'm going to keep it rocking. I'll bring Kai up on the stage next for the good old, he's going to talk to us about how he made Mistral not suck. So Matt, take care, bro. And everyone go check out Matt's book, LLMs in Production by Manning. And you can get the free, 45% off? We'll drop that link in the chat too.
45% off. Yep.
There you go. That's a no-brainer. That is a no-brainer. And follow Matt on LinkedIn if you're not doing it already. I'll see you later.